And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. And as you can see, my panelists have arrived. I told you might be less than 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined by KanthanPillay.com. That's his name, apparently. And Dumo Denga and the Dodgy Idealist. How are you, gentlemen?
I'm fit and fabulous. How are you guys doing?
Good, thank you.
Once again, guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight to have a very interesting conversation. It started with my first panel evening. We touched on hate speech, and it kind of got into a bit of a discussion, but it wasn't really what we were talking about for that panel evening. And then the conversation kind of went into social media. People started talking about it there, and then I was like, hey, let's get a panel together, let's talk about this is an interesting conversation. And I think a very good way to start off is to maybe read the definition of hate speech, and maybe Daniel Elof, who's also watching at the moment, can give me maybe the constitutional definition if he doesn't mind. But according to Google, and this isn't a bad definition, by the way, but according to Google, hate speech is defined as abusive or threatening speech or writing that expresses prejudice against a particular group, especially on the basis of race, religion, or sexual orientation. That is hate speech as defined by Google. If Daniel wants to, you can give me the constitutional definition. I'll put it up there as well. But we're here to ask the question, does it actually exist? I'll go first on this one and explain my position on this. I think it does. That's where I stand. I think it does because basically, well, we've seen repercussions, right? We've seen what happens when people have... I think in today's society, we do have free speech, but there's limitations because words have meaning. Words can influence people. Words can cause people to do things. Words, even if it's unintentional, you know, I might say something tonight that will cause some, like, for example, if I say, last night I was showing a new lightsaber that I got. Someone might go and buy it because I said, go buy it from Saber Vault or whatever. It's a really good quality. Stupid example, but I'm just saying words have meaning. Words can influence people. Words can lead to action with individuals, especially when you start talking about, and this is where it gets dangerous, when you start talking about evil things. And we've seen this in history with World War II and Hitler and the Jews. I just cannot... I understand where some people come from by saying, like, yeah, hate speech is like a thing that is made by humans, and there's, like, it's not like... we don't really have freedom of speech because we have hate speech. It's like, well, that's the thing. If you give complete freedom to humans, I think we're going to be in a very chaotic world. So that's why I think there needs to be, I think we do have freedom of speech. I think in some countries we have more freedom of speech than some other countries in this world. But unfortunately, I think there does need to be something called hate speech. I think it does exist, and I think it is dangerous to just let people say whatever it is they want to say. So yeah, that's me. We'll go to Kanthan. Let's go with you. Where do you stand on this topic?
Why me, John Big Booty, is the words from the famous Bakru Banzai movie. I'm very pleased that you use Google as a frame of reference. And, you know, while you're at it, if you can dig up some information about the ways in which I can get money back from all of those people who have fled various corrupt regimes in the world, and they only need my bank account details. So now you know what I think about Google in terms of that. Guys, you know, our Constitution, okay, in the Bill of Rights, which is Chapter 2, and there's a section, Freedom of Expression, which says basically everyone has the right to freedom of expression, which includes freedom of the press and other media, freedom to receive or impart information or ideas, freedom of artistic creativity, and academic freedom and freedom of scientific research. The rights in subsection 1, in other words, the stuff I've just read out, does not extend to propaganda for war, incitement of imminent violence, or advocacy of hatred that is based on race, ethnicity, gender, or religion, and that constitutes incitement for harm. Now, the crucial thing for me is that nowhere there does it talk about hate speech. All right. It just talks about very specific exceptions to the concept of freedom of expression. And I think that's a good starting point for us because as soon as we get into the territory where we start thinking about broad things like hate speech, it becomes very much a question of perception. And this was the case in terms of the US Supreme Court about, probably 50 years ago, where there was a judge who very famously said, I can't tell you what pornography is, but I know it when I see it. And that's part of the problem, because as soon as the way in which you try to nail down what something is depends on the perception of the person who's actually making the call, then society actually cannot function based on perception, much as there are many people in our media today who'd prefer that be the case. So I don't believe that we should be talking about hate speech, but should we be talking about particular categories of speech that do have the potential to cause trouble based on the fact that they advocate hatred based on race or ethnicity or gender or religion, and and is the critical thing, constitutes incitement to cause harm. So it's not enough to just simply have all of the stuff that ticks the aforementioned boxes. You need to be able to show that it constitutes incitement to cause harm. So that's kind of my broad brushstrokes, and we can kind of talk about where this goes from there. But as you can see, the definition right now in terms of our Constitution is very specific. It's not enough for you to advocate hatred that is based on race, ethnicity, etc., but it also has to constitute incitement to cause harm. So for me to simply turn around and say that I don't like people who belong to the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, and this is a real church, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's not enough for me to say that. The fact that I say it also has to be coupled with my inciting someone to go out there and cause harm. And so, in terms of our Constitution, it's a very specific test.
Okay.
So, let me just stop at that point.
No, it's great. Okay, that's a very good starting point for all of us. I want to say that technically you would side with hate speech doesn't exist because you define it differently. Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Dumo, you're next.
All right. I'm going to try to approach this philosophically. So if one had to define hate speech, I think the first problem we're going to run into is that, as Kanthan mentioned now, he didn't mention hate speech, but you could see in our Constitution, there's specific categories of speech that are defined as unlawful. Now, if I had to ask one person who believes that hate speech exists and ask them what they mean by it, they may give me a different answer to the next person and the next person and the next person. Because to the first person, it may be something that hurts my feelings. And then the next one, it may be, well, if they say something that I disagree with, it could be that, So I think if you had to first get a definition of hate speech, I don't know what that would be. I'm not saying, I mean, maybe it does exist, but maybe the definition is just not clear enough. But from what I can see, it looks like it can be anything based on perception. And I think going back to Kanthan's point, I think we have to look at specific categories of speech that may have some sort of like implications. So if you look at it from a utilitarian perspective, like if I say something and that inspires someone to do something violent or do something that is not good, should that be unlawful? Should that be ticked as unlawful? I think that's a good place to start at. But when you say, does hate speech exist? I would just say I don't know. Maybe it does, but I just think there needs to be a very clear definition. And I just think that given the definitions, it just makes it, and the varying definitions, it makes it very unclear.
Fair enough. All right, Dodgy, you're next.
Okay. So I've written down quite a few things because I was preparing for this. But so here are some ideas that has been thrown around quite often, back and forth with some discussions. One of them is, within the idea of free speech, there is no such thing as a false idea, however pernicious an opinion may seem. We depend for its correction not on the conscience of judges and juries, but on the competition of other ideas. This was said in 1974 by a judge, Gert v. Rosen or Robert Welch. And then I don't even think we can or should punish speech itself, because as another judge said, a physical assault is not by any stretch of the imagination expressive conduct protected by the freedom of speech. Hate crime laws are constitutional as long as they punish violence or vandalism, the physical assault or the physical crime. In other words, we do not punish the speech, we punish the outcome of that speech. And so we can say, for example, let's say I stab someone, as an example. Let's say I go and I stab Dumo, and I tell the judge or the jury, I stabbed him because he was black. Obviously, obviously the punishment will be harsher because the reason for that is motivated by an intrinsic hatred on the premises of race. Whereas the punishment might not be as severe if I went and stabbed Kanthan, for example, out of a fit of anger. So I do think that we do punish it, but we do not punish the speech in of itself. Hate speech, on the other hand, wants to punish the speech in and of itself, even before the crime has been committed. Also, I want to quote something else here to add on to your earlier statement or your opening statement, Joe. This comes from a movie, The Kingdom of Heaven, and this speech has been stuck with me from a very early age. A king may move the man, a father may claim a son. That man can also move himself, and only then does that man truly begin his own game. Remember that whosoever you are played, or howsoever you are played, or by whom your soul, or by whomever, your soul is in your keeping alone. Even those who presume to play you be kings or men of power. When you stand before God, you cannot say, but I was told by others to do thus, or that virtue was not convenient at the time. In other words, we are responsible for our own actions. I cannot say, for example, that because you told me to go and buy the lightsaber, I did that. It was a choice that I had to ultimately make for myself. As much as I would like to blame you for the awful red lightsaber that I bought, because I'm actually a Padawan and not a Sith Lord, unfortunately, that's not how it works. Reality is we are agents, we are conscious agents, and we act on our own beliefs and our own, how can I say, inclinations. And that's basically where I'm going to stop at this point, because I think, yeah.
Cool. So I think we all have like different views and opinions on the topic. I think Dodgy's view is an interesting one. And I think Kanthan Pillay, everyone has an interesting stance on this. Where I would like to get to, though, is, okay, let's tackle first hate speech. It seems that everybody on this panel agrees in one way or another that the term hate speech does not exist because it's up to interpretation. Anybody, like, there was a comment here earlier there by Richard saying, these days everything is hate speech. If you say the sky is blue, you're pissing someone off. which, yeah, it's open to interpretation. So that is an interesting thing for me because, we have at the moment maybe a confusion with the term then, it sounds like. Because it seems like the populace would say, if you say, that's hate speech. The populace thinks by the definition of what Kanthan said, like, oh, well, you can't just say whatever it is you want to say. You can't just express everything you want to say. There are going to be consequences because it's what you said now is incitement to violence, or it's incitement to this, or incitement to that, or it's belittling a group or whatever. So maybe that is the issue. Kanthan, what do you have to say? Do you think that maybe the term hate speech has been confused?
I think that what we've got is a scenario where people allow their feelings to override the actual constitutionality of stuff that's going on. And I often respond to people who start talking about hate speech by saying, that's really offensive to me. It's offensive to my culture. And my response has generally been, you do realize our Constitution does not give you the right to not be offended. At which point people generally, pause, and it doesn't. Our Constitution doesn't say anything about the right to not be offended. Our Constitution does touch on issues around dignity, but again, that's kind of a dodgy area. And I think for the purpose of the discussion this evening, which fundamentally I think is going to track back to the question of Julius Malema versus AfriForum, and I think that's the direction where we want to take this conversation. So if you look at it in that particular context, the fact that people believe that something might constitute hate speech or might be offensive to them in their personal capacity is not enough of a reason for us to actually give that any credit. What is of something that we should be focusing on is whether there are actions that derive directly from the utterance of such speech, where you can clearly show that if those words had not been uttered, then the consequences would not have emerged. So to give you an example, one of the tropes that gets trotted out with a fair amount of regularity, it's people who say, oh, you can't just have freedom of speech because it's like shouting fire in a crowded theater. And, the fact is that if someone shouts fire in a crowded theater, you're not prosecuting them for their speech. You're actually prosecuting them for reckless endangerment based on the fact that they've done something that is going to incite people into stampeding because they were afraid. And you're not prosecuting them for freedom of speech. You are prosecuting them for reckless endangerment in that case. In the case of someone inciting someone else to commit murder, by saying, go out there and murder this guy. That's not a free speech matter. That is incitement to murder. And again, you prosecute the person for the fact that they incited someone to murder someone else. So this brings us back to the main question that we're trying to resolve out here, which is whether people should have the right to say things that are clearly hateful and are clearly designed to stir up emotions against a particular person or a particular group and be able to get away with it. And my take on that is, yes, they should be allowed to do so. And the reason why I say that they should be allowed to do so is because if there are people out there who want to tell other people to kill me, I want to know that they are saying that, so that I can actually mark them out, I can actually arm myself against them. And at the point at which they then pitch up at my doorstep, I will have no hesitation whatsoever in taking them out, and on the basis of the fact that they have clearly said that if they pitch up at my place, they are there to take me out. And I think that that's the single biggest argument that I can make in favor of allowing people to spout as much hatred as they want to, because it actually gives us advance notice that we can end up protecting ourselves. So that's one part of the puzzle. The second part of the puzzle, and I have to go back to the constitutionality again, where, the Constitution says advocacy of hatred that is based on race, ethnicity, etc., and that constitutes incitement to cause harm. So you see, it's not enough to have advocacy of hatred that's based on race, ethnicity, gender, or religion. The word "and" is very specific, because if it was "or," it means one or the other. But because it says "and," it means that you actually have to tick those boxes. So you have to have advocacy of hatred that is based on one of those categories and constitute incitement to cause harm. So when the likes of Julius Malema turns around and says that he wants to kill white people, as an example, and trust me, this is probably just one in a long line of targets that Julius Malema has his sights on. When he says that, the test for me becomes whether, as a direct result of what Julius Malema is saying, whether someone actually goes out and commits violence. Now, here's where it becomes dodgy. It becomes dodgy because I need to actually show that there's a correlation between Malema saying the stuff that he did and someone becoming a victim of criminality as a result of what Malema said. Now, the kind of broad brushstrokes for me around this. Let's take the question of farm murders, which again our mainstream media refuses to talk about. I'm very clear in my head that the words that Julius Malema utters would be a contributing factor in the question of farm murders. I'm very clear about that. The difficulty for me is being able to draw a line between Julius Malema saying that and proving that it was as a direct result of his words that a particular farm murder was occurred. And the only point at which we're going to be able to do that is if we actually are able to capture one of those people, get them to confess under oath, at which point we've got a smoking gun. And then we have the capacity to go after Julius. So what I'm getting at here, basically, and again, going back to the court case of AfriForum versus Malema, and I've got to say that the team, Daniel, if you're still listening, I think that guys out there did a bloody good job. Mark Oppenheimer, I actually thought was excellent in terms of putting Malema on the spot. I'm not, however, convinced that in terms of trying to prove that there's a correlation between what Malema said, which is clearly hate speech, and showing an outcome that we can then hang him on. Wasn't sure that that case was actually being made. And I think now you understand it comes back to the basic problem that we started off with. Because if we talk about something that's hate speech, unless we can actually show that causal relationship, it's hugely difficult for us, guys. And I don't know the answer to this. But what I'm clear about is that I don't think the solution is to cut back on speech because of the fact that there might potentially be the negative impact that kicks in.
No, absolutely. I don't think like I do think that there are limitations as according to the Constitution, like for example inciting violence or whatever. I think you can say whatever it is you want to say, but you got to be prepared for the consequences. Like that's where I stand on it. Say what you want to say, but then you're gonna have to deal with the consequences because we have laws, like you've mentioned them now. We have rules. You either learn to live within the confines of that law, or if you break it, deal with the consequences. Just like if you go and you, like Dodgy was saying earlier, if you stab someone, you're gonna go to jail. Like that's basically what's gonna happen. But anyway, I like what you're saying, Kanthan. And my thing is, for me, maybe I've also been one of those few people that have kind of been warped with this idea of what hate speech is, and now I'm getting kind of a clearer view of it myself. But I want to go to Dumo quickly, and Dumo said that he had a very philosophical way of looking at this. So, Dumo, what do you have to say about what Kanthan said now, about the EFF and Julius? Because I think that is going to be a very focal point in this conversation. It's relevant. It's now. It's happening. Where do you stand on what Kanthan said and the EFF and AfriForum? You're muted.
Right. I agree with what. Am I muted? Oh,
now you're fine. Now you're fine.
Oh, you guys can hear me now.
Yeah. Now you're muted again.
Cool.
All right. No, you're fine. Now you're fine.
So I'm muted again. Okay. All right. Sorry. All right. I think given what Kanthan said, I agree with it. I think the challenge is just that how do you link someone's words to someone's actions? So I saw in the comments. I mean, I think if I'm not mistaken, I think in one of the what they brought as evidence in that EFF case was that one in one farm murder, on the wall it was written in blood, "Kill the Boer, Viva Malema," right? Now, I don't know if one could say that that is actually evidence of incitement to violence, but I think it can be used as strong support because of the fact that the actual words and the person who actually sang the song are actually like at the crime scene, and it's written with the blood, you know. And I think I think that it is possible that someone's words can incite someone to do something wrong or do some or cause harm. That is possible, but I think proving it is very difficult because the same thing could have happened, but they didn't write. Let's imagine that the same thing happened, but they didn't write "Kill the Boer on the wall." They just left it, right? They just left the scene. Now, if we could read their minds and go back and have some Black Mirror, if we lived in a Black Mirror world, then we could just like plug I don't know, a cable in their head and see what they were thinking at that particular point in time. Probably we would think that yes, it's inspired by Malema, but without that, we don't have any evidence. So I think that just looking at it, yes, someone can do that, but proving it is very difficult. And now I'm going to throw a span in the works. What if okay, this is a really hectic one, but it might be not well received. But let's say these attackers actually, let's say, took the blood and they wrote songs to a very harmless song. Let's say they wrote lyrics to, I don't know, they wrote Baby Shark on the wall, and they wrote do 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 and everything like that. Now, can one say that was actually can one say that that was actually that song is actually incitement to violence? Very interesting.
Dumo, you're clearly,
right?
you're clearly not a parent, dude.
No, I am. I'm sorry. That was the first thing that came to mind. I was going to think Amazing Grace, but then I was like, no. Okay. But something along those lines, right? So the problem is that when lyrics have a violent, have violent words or words that express violence, and then we see that manifesting, the link becomes clear. But then if we like switch it up, then the links don't become so clear, because one could say, well, how can someone be inspired to do that by listening to Baby Shark? Like, you know, doesn't make sense, right? So I think that those links can be made, but I think there are other situations that can really question our intuition on making those links.
But
I'll leave it there.
Guys, isn't it obvious that this song can lead to violence? I mean, isn't it obvious that when this song is sung, as far as Ernst has written in his book Kill the Boer, farm murders go up after a song, you know? There's more violence after a song. We saw it at Cynical. You had not Julius, but his sidekick. I always forget his name. Not Shubambu, the short, skinny one. You know, singing "Burn the Farm" or something to that effect, "Burn the Farm" or whatever. And then 2 days later, there's like farms being burnt near the area. You know, can we agree on that? Like, there is like, because I'm hearing both of you say like, oh, it's difficult to make that connection. You know, but I'm like, if you look at it though, it's not that difficult. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I clarify, right? I'm saying that there are very clear cases where it's like obvious that, yes, there are, you can have speech that incites violence. I don't deny that. I fully accept that. But it's just that now there are situations where someone said something and then subsequent to that, an event occurred where someone performed violence. And then if you look at it, you can say perhaps there's a link between the speech and the acts of violence, but proving that is very difficult because we don't have enough information and everything like that. But I won't lie, there are very clear links. Now, like, let's say, for example, in the burn, when Shubambu said burn the farms, and then 2 days later, farms were burnt. Now, if that's all we know, we can intuitively say perhaps it was as a result of Shubambu's speech. speech, but we have to prove it. We have to show that, listen, this is why. I mean, this is why those farms were burnt. So I think that's the difficult part. It's actually putting those links together. And then once those links are proven, then I think, yeah, that's fine. But sometimes it just could be that, no, maybe someone actually had an accident. You know, it could have been that, you know, he left the lamp on and then he kicked it over and then everything started burning. And then that's possible, you know? So, but then that you'll find from investigating the case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to clarify, it was Ndlozi, not Shivambu. Okay. Yeah, so Dodgy, I see you itching to say some stuff, so I'm going to let you take the floor here if you want to comment on what Dumo and Kanthan have said.
Okay, yeah. So to add to that, I think they both made very good points, and that's what I'm trying to get to as well. It's not enough to just prosecute someone on their speech alone. I mean, that's going to be very difficult. You have to have an action, and then you have to somehow prove that action has arisen because of that speech or those hateful words that have been spoken. So to drive home Kanthan's point, for example, I'm sorry if I'm going to swear, but this is what the artwork was called. It was called "Fuck White People" by Dean Hutton in 2017. We all remember that. It was just a few words spattered on black and white background. And, you know, the court actually found it to be not hate speech or in any contravention of any freedom of speech laws, because it was considered art. It was considered part of the freedom of expression. It was protected under that. And I agree with that, because as hateful or as hurtful as that might have been, I do not think that alone constitutes as something hateful. If that art, for example, gave rise to violence against white people in that very same period of time, and you could actually prove it somehow, then yes, you would have had a case. Another one, for example, was Katsavelos in Greece in 2018, where he said that very dreaded word. Now, we have law in South Africa as well called crimen injura, where it's the willful injury to someone's dignity caused by the use of obscene or racially offensive language or gestures. So even that is based around speech, but that is also based on another subjective thing, dignity. But I think what people struggle with is that hate speech is a political label that we use to define certain speech or certain things that we might champion as unacceptable. And it's this kind of, how can I say, perpetuation of a neo-Marxist idea, actually. And I've written about this as well, called Repressive Tolerance by Herbert Marcuse, where it states that if we allow people to hold certain opinions and views that are offensive or might cause emotional or psychological harm to others, then we as the public, because we are tolerating that, we are actually perpetuating that sort of suffering of those people. And so we need to be intolerant of such things, which is then a precursor to things like hate speech laws or the ideas of hate speech. And this is further emphasized in a book, The Authoritarian Personality by Theodor Adorno, where he states that these sort of offensive ideas can only perpetuate from the right on the political spectrum, right? So if you hold contrary views to what would mainstream be considered acceptable and left-wing, for lack of better description, then you are causing or a cause of a repetition on repression and oppression. So for me, that's why I say, hate speech in essence shouldn't exist, because it stems from these sort of very dangerous ideas.
Okay. I hear what you're saying, and it does make a little bit of sense. But I want to go to your example of the white people. I think that's very, very similar. I don't know who here watched day 9 of the AfriForum versus EFF with the expert on songs. But she was basically also saying that it's a song, it's not a command, it's not whatever you want to call it, incitement to violence. It's a song, it's a chant, it cannot be taken literal. So let's dissect that. Is that an infringement? And Kanthan Pillay, I'm going to come to you. Is that an infringement on the or against the Constitution? Because, like you mentioned earlier in the show, you're allowed to express yourself. You're allowed the expression and all that stuff, but is Kill the Boer considered art? Can it be a song considered art and therefore untouchable? Because it's a very interesting situation, because you don't want to censor necessarily art, but at the same time, this is a very dangerous kind of art, as Dodgy was saying.
You're asking me to make a value judgment in the absence of being able to show a line that one can draw between someone saying "kill the Boer" and a person actually being killed. And that is my point of difficulty, because I'm not actually able to show that direct correlation. So, again, the question of art, guys, I think we can all agree that my idea of art is going to be very different from most people's idea of art. I have a view of art that's formed very much by classic work that actually depicts things of beauty, as opposed to things that show stuff that I would be afraid to show my kids, basically. It's a very similar kind of scenario where if I'm not able to connect the dots, I have difficulty saying it. What I'd like to do,
Sorry, if I can just,
okay.
Can I add to
Sure.
it? Let's change it up a little bit. So what if in the, I think it was the example mentioned earlier, but hypothetical, let's make it hypothetical. What if there was a farm murder and on the wall was written "Kill the Boer"? Kill the farmer, kill the Boer.
I still think that it would be difficult to show a correlation, because of the fact that the person who commits the act, you'd have to show that the person actually got that inspiration from the fact that this person said those words, as opposed to other people saying those words as well, which again comes back to the heart of the matter for me. Now, don't get me wrong with this. I think that the court case that AfriForum brought is actually significant. And it's significant because it helps us to actually delineate the parameters under which the court is willing to say that it's going to be lenient in terms of particular categories of speech. But the more crucial point that I'll go back to, and this is something that I've been saying for years on end, the question of farm murders very specifically, for me, I think that we trivialize it at the point at which we try to attribute it to hate speech that is coming from a particular individual. From where I sit, it's very clear to me that this is a deeply orchestrated campaign of systemic violence that is driven with a very specific political agenda. And by trying to nail it down on particular words that get uttered by political leaders, it's actually distracting us from tracking down where this thing is actually coming from. Because let's be very clear, that the type of brutality that we have seen, specifically in farm murders, is of a kind that is, frankly unparalleled in any part of the world right now. And it's very clear to me, where I'm sitting, that this is highly organized, highly orchestrated, and until we get to the point where we are able to actually track down the source that this is coming from and put in place criminal charges against the entire infrastructure that is driving it, I think that we do ourselves a disservice by focusing on the free speech aspect instead of actually going after the criminals that are behind this thing.
All right. So just to make sure I got you clearly here, you can sing "Kill the Boer" as an art form until it is proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it does lead to violence. Till you can make that undeniable connection between the song and the incitement to violence, which is a fair thing to say. It's fair.
Yeah, that's quite right. That's quite right, because you know that that rather twisted expert witness that we had, was making exactly that point,
Yeah.
and it becomes really difficult to disprove. What really came out of that was the fundamental hypocrisy that she exhibits,
Yes.
in terms of not willing to consider a hypothetical situation. But putting that aside, as long as you have people of that sort who are willing to come before a court and say, no, no, these are just harmless words. And in my capacity as an academic, PhD, whatever uh, titles they may happen to have, I'm very clear that this is the way in which people express themselves in a joyful, liberating manner while, wanting to wish death upon other people. It's hugely difficult, guys.
Yeah,
Bring
it's
and
it's the
yeah.
difficult thing for me is like like I hear what you guys are saying, right? Like I get it. I'm not like I understand it, but at the same time there's a level of uncomfortability for me to know that there's a group of people regardless of their race, just even if it was a group of people that were saying kill Indians or or kill black people. Like imagine there was a group of people that said killed black people. Imagine the DA would say one bullet, one black person. Imagine that happened. I mean, the ANC,
No, no,
everybody in this
but
world wouldn't
The
stand for it.
DA has an anti-gun policy, so that doesn't work.
We're supposed to be dealing in hypotheticals, Canton.
Yes, but let's not, guys, let's not verge on the ridiculous here, shall we?
Fair enough. But still, okay. Any group that not political party, any group that would just come out and say like kill one bullet, one black person, one bullet, one Jew, one bullet, one American, which was said by the way. Like it shouldn't be accepted in my opinion, because that can lead to, that is incitement to violence. I feel like that is telling someone like grab a gun and shoot this group of people.
Well, my defense in this particular case would be, if someone, came up to me with a crowd and said to other people in the crowd, kill the Indian, I would feel perfectly justified in taking out every single one of those people. And I would then take my chances in a court of law. And frankly, I think that is up to every single individual to make that call for themselves. So notice that I've said this is what I would do in that particular position. This is not me saying that I'm inciting other people to do that. But I do believe that in that particular scenario, I would go before court, and I'm fairly convinced that the courts would find that that was justifiable, and they would put it down as self-defense, because under the circumstances there's a clear and visible threat to me, and I am perfectly justified in defending myself.
Yes.
Now, other people have a different view on that. I think the aforementioned DA, most of them are pacifists, and they probably hold up placards saying rule of law, or something like that. And we know where that leads to.
Well, yeah, I think again, I think Mark Rock also agrees here. He says, Joe, that's exactly why hate speech laws are stupid. There is no equality under the law. When Juju can sing "Kill the Farmer," you can't sing "Kill the EFF." And yeah, I think that's why we're having this conversation, is to really get to the bottom of, again, what is hate speech? Does it exist? And as far as I can tell, the term hate speech doesn't exist. I mean, I 100% agree with Kanthan's definition by the Constitution. If that's what the Constitution says, and it does say that, then that's what I stand by.
But the interesting thing is that the likes of the Human Rights Commission take a different view on it.
Okay, what's their view?
Well, so the likes of the Human Rights Commission look for opportunities to actually go after people on the basis of the fact that what they have uttered happens to be hate speech. Okay, now I wrote a piece not so long ago, and the title of the piece was "I'm a Kafir and proud of it."
Oh boy, I'm canceled
And
now.
no, and this is something that I've said without hesitation over the years. It's a little known fact among people in this continent that that term was actually used against my ancestors in the Indian subcontinent as well.
Oh,
And
okay.
it was a term that actually originated from the Arabs because it came from the
Yes.
word kafir, which basically means infidel. Which, and I'm certainly in that particular category. So the Human Rights Commission called me and they said, "We want a statement from you in terms of your hate speech." And I said, "If you want to charge me, you must charge me.
Did they?
I'm not issuing a statement to defend things that I've said in terms of work that I've actually published. And look, and certainly the work stands up to scrutiny as far as I'm concerned, in terms of the message that I was putting across. It makes a very specific point around how trying to put people into pigeonholes based on the fact that they utter things that other people find offensive, in fact, ends up leading to radicalizing them to a far greater extent than otherwise would have been the case. But like I said, the Human Rights Commission is a very specific beast. It's a bulldog for the ANC to go after very specific people. If we take a look at Adam Katsavelos, for example, I understand that he went through a process of facing a court case out here. I would argue in that case, and I'm not defending what he said at any level, but I would argue in that case there is no jurisdiction because this is something that was committed in a foreign country.
Yeah.
And frankly, if anyone is to charge him, then it needs to be the Greeks who end up going after him and charging him. Now, I'm fully aware that in this particular case, there were complications and there was a need on the part of based on the fact that his family are in business and so forth, and they needed to find some way of making reparations. And that's all well and good. But I still think that the legal decision happened to be flawed in that particular case, which is not in any way condoning what the guy has said. And by the way, the only person I've ever called a kafir is myself. I have never used the term against any other person, and I would not do so because my basic philosophy of life is don't be a dick.
Yeah,
And
I live by that too.
yeah, and I think it's something that all of us should actually strive to do. Just don't be a dick. And uh, using racial epithets on other people it's basically a dick move, because what it means is that you've run out of every conceivable rational argument, and then you resort to the most crude type of insult that you can possibly fling out. And frankly, that's not the way human beings are supposed to interact. But does that mean I want to prosecute people for saying stuff like that? No, I'm afraid not.
No, excellent points, and most of which I do agree with. Like, don't be a dick. Like, I definitely try and live my life like that every day. But I want to go to Dumo quickly, man. Kanthan touching on some interesting phrasing there, if I can put it that way. But that's also a good topic to go into, and obviously we'll be as delicate as possible here. The N word and the K word. Someone earlier put out a comment about Penny Sparrow. Saying, "Excuse my ignorance, but what was Penny Sparrow convicted of?" We all know that story. So where do you stand when it comes to these words? Because a lot of people would say that is hate speech. Using those terms, that is hate speech when you say it to someone. But by the constitutional definition, really, it doesn't really incite violence, as far as I understand. So, Dumo, your take on that?
Yeah, I agree. As long as it doesn't incite violence, then I think someone should not be prosecuted for saying it. So, for example, if someone calls me the K word, I would say, okay, this guy is not a good person. Shouldn't hang out with this guy. Let me just leave him alone. Someone calls me the N word. It's a bit different because my perception of the N word was a bit positive. Even in high school, I had white friends. We called each other by the N words and stuff. And you see you hear the positive connotations, right? And not to say that people should use the N word. I'm not saying that they should, but for me, that's how the N word is to me. But if someone says it to me in a way to kind of like make me feel bad and stuff like that, I don't think that they should get prosecuted for it. But at least it shows that, hey, this person's a bad person and they're actually giving you a red flag. So stay away from this person. Don't befriend him and stuff like that. So I think as long as it doesn't, I don't think such will cause violence. Yes, I think one could argue that it's probably immoral to say something like that. They could argue it on that level, but it doesn't mean it should be prosecuted. So that's the thing. So, but I wouldn't say it's immoral to use that because there are people who will use that word for other circumstances. Like, for example, like in high school, there's this book called To Kill a Mockingbird, right? And then, when you read it out loud in class, they say the N word, right? Now, obviously, they're just reading it out because the teacher told them to read it out. And yes, some people will be offended and some may feel that it's immoral for that person to read that, knowing the context of the word. But even if that's the case, I don't think that person should be prosecuted or punished for that. It's a very, I try to draw a very hard line on it that, look, something can be perceived as immoral, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it should be prosecuted by the law. Like, for example, lying. I would say that there are situations where lying is immoral, but I wouldn't say that all lying should be prosecuted. Like, for example, but if you lie in court, for example, I would argue that, yeah, you probably should get prosecuted for that because, there's a case going on. They're trying to find the right verdict. And here you are lying. You know what I'm trying to say? And I think now some may even say that, no, that someone should not get prosecuted for that and make an
No,
argument.
but actually, Dumo, Dumo, in that particular case, that is a specific crime. Lying to the court is perjury. So it's not a free speech matter. There's very specific infringement of law that happens when you lie before court. And so it goes back to the starting point of what we were talking about. If you are breaking the law in terms of words that you are uttering, clearly lying under oath is one of the issues. Lying with a view to defame someone else is clearly another case where you can't put it down to free speech, because clearly the intent there is to cause harm to another person by spreading false information about them. But coming back to our starting point, I guess it's not the words themselves; it's the outcomes that matter.
Right. Fair enough. It's a very utilitarian approach, I would say. No, but I mean, I'm not a utilitarian. But I do agree that utilitarianism can solve a lot of things very quickly. But I just want to maybe this is just something that I just thought of right now, right? I'm just thinking in terms of defamation, right? I don't know which country, I don't know how it works in South Africa specifically, and I'm willing to get educated on this, right? But if I, let's say something that causes someone to lose a specific opportunity and it's truthful, does that count as defamation? Just a question.
No, I think what I've taught in journalism classes over the years is that the only defense, that the most effective defense against defamation, is truth in the public interest. But the crucial thing is that it has to be truth in the public interest. So, for example, it's clearly truth in the public interest if someone has been stealing money from state coffers. It's not truth in the public interest if someone is sleeping with someone else.
Right.
And those are, it's a very clear-cut case where, so it's not enough for it to be true, but so, to your specific example, if someone is applying for a job and uh, you happen to leak the information that uh, this person happens to watch pornography, to go back to something that you've spoken about in the past, Dumo. And if that ends up costing the person his or her job, then there is grounds for them to actually sue you, because that's not truth in the public interest.
Okay. Fair. All right. No, that's fine. Just wanted to know. My question has been answered.
All right. Look, I think I want to get to Dodgy quickly. Dodgy, it's an interesting situation I find myself in. I don't know how about you feel, but I think I've always been right on the money in terms of like hate speech, which is now I'm learning is like just freedom of expression or whatever, and the laws that come with that. But I guess my question to you is, you have had a very interesting opinion about hate speech and all this stuff. Is this what you were trying to say in the other show? Is this where you were coming from, or are you of the camp that we should do away with these laws, anything that prohibits speech, and only prosecute in terms of crime? So, for example, if someone actually does something, like let's say someone says, like it was in that article, I think Dumo, what's your name? Your friend that wrote that article, Zix, who is saying that I cannot be held responsible for the things that I say. Basically, I cannot be held responsible for someone else doing something because I say something. I am allowed to say my opinions, my thoughts, my views. And if someone, even if it's killing, if someone goes out and does something, that's their own thing. Is that so? How far do you go with freedom of expression or speech? Is what I'm trying to ask.
Basically, the later, because again, as Kanthan and Dumo pointed out, to try and tie these things together, to show that my words influenced you in a degree where you do not have, let's say, the person that committed the crime actually saying like, hey, this person is actually the reason why I did it, then I don't think I should be held accountable for their actions, even though it might have a correlation. Correlation does not necessarily mean causation, after all. As horrible as that sounds. So I do side with that portion as well. However, I do think that we need to clarify something as well. Incitement is not protected, not because of the hateful content, but because of the consequences it has. I think Kanthan hit on that nail as well. And we also need to be very careful about how we go about trying to prohibit people with regards to their speech and publication and stuff. For example, in 1920, in the Weimar Republic, they clamped down on all publications that spread Nazi ideology and ideas and so on. One such person was Julius Streicher. He was the chief editor of the, let me see if I can read my own handwriting, Der Stürmer, that basically used his own trial as a public podium to further his own ideas and ideology, and then used his imprisonment as a sort of martyrdom to his cause, which then further sparked more radicalization. In 2017, for example, a European Journal of Political Research found that radicalism and these sort of violent incursions are sort of fueled in extensive part by the radical public repression of actors and opinions. So there's been a study on this as well, and I think Kanthan also mentioned something like that as well earlier on, where he said it can lead to these extremists as well. Another form of where I think this can become very dangerous is Canada, the trucker movement there, where government used the idea of the greater good or the protection of the public, whether physical, emotional, or psychological, as a means to freeze people's bank accounts through the Emergency Act that they've brought forth. America also, to a degree, has done this by freezing bank accounts from businesses and publications that they do not like. So it's definitely not only China that does this, right? It's happening all over the world, the repression of the freedom of expression. But I also will echo what I said on that show that we had the first time. And I think this is something that we need to understand as well. Our belief on hate speech is informed by our moral position on harm to both individuals and groups. In other words, do I think that me saying this will be harmful to some other person or group of people? It might not necessarily mean to say that should I be prosecuted for something that I said, but it's more to do with my personal moral view of whether or not is it correct of me saying something like this. Would I like it if someone else said something similar or in a similar fashion about myself? And I think that is the thing that should distinguish our actions. Certain things should be legislated. After all, government is created to curb our, how can I say it, our inclinations, our bad inclinations, whereas society basically exists to foster our own ideals and ideas and our own, how can I say, interests. But that should not necessarily mean that it should be without consequence. That consequence does not necessarily mean to be legislated and to be prosecuted. It can mean like, oh, hey, I said something mean, so Dumo won't have anything more to do with me. He's no longer my friend. He doesn't want to trade with me anymore. It can have those kinds of consequences as well. And to be honest, I think those are far better consequences and which have also far better outcomes than a legislated position on these sort of things.
But then where does cancel culture fit in?
Cancel culture, I do not even like it.
Yeah, but I mean, if you say something, right? If you say something I don't agree with, all right? I'm like, and you just said now, if you said something, Dumo can say, I'm not going to do business with you. But what if Dumo goes one step further? You know, starts telling his buddies like, oh, did you hear Dodgy, man? Like, he said this and that. He said the N word. He said the K word. He's been this rhetoric, blah, blah. We shouldn't do business with him, blah, 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 blah. You know, a form of cancel culture. Obviously, cancel culture goes a little bit more extreme where they contact the place of employment or whatever.
Yes.
Which is borderline defamation as well. You know, so are you saying that in a way, cancel culture is acceptable?
It depends. Again, it's like Kanthan pointed out. Is it in the interest of the public? Is it interest of public truth? If so, then I do think
but
it
let's
can.
But
if not,
sorry, let's define that, because someone actually asked, and I would like a definition on this.
Good question,
Joe. What's the definition of public interest?
The definition of public interest, very specifically in terms of our defamation law, fluctuates depending on who the person is that happens to be involved. No, actually, it does help. Look, it's broad brushstrokes, but they're clearly defined broad brushstrokes. So, public interest, for example, in terms of politicians, is far more broadly defined than public interest would be in the case of, say, Dumo. So, because of the fact that a politician, you know, generally happens to be an elected official, and one can take a view that their lives are subject to greater scrutiny than other people. But the question that the viewer is asking us is a fair question, and there isn't a specific answer. And look, there are very clear examples of exceptions to what can be construed to be in public interest. For example, our law is very clear that there is no public interest in divorce proceedings. to give you a very specific example, irrespective of who the person is that's actually involved. Now, um, I'm probably the only person here who remembers this going back to the time of Nelson Mandela's divorce. But almost every publication in the country actually broke the law to carry details of um, uh, Nelson Mandela's divorce proceedings, and the man was president at the time. And the only reason why they got away with it is because he refused to press charges. So I guess the short answer is I can't give you a very specific definition of public interest without having a case. And then when I look at the case, I will tell you, well, based on what's happened around publications, in particular, being taken to court in the past, this would be considered to be public interest. This would not be considered to be public interest. Mm-hmm. So, and there was a particular case that I lost some years ago when I was managing editor of the Cape Times in the wake of the Planet Hollywood bombings in 1998. There was a very high-profile arrest that took place right in front of Cape Town Airport, and we happened to take a photograph of the arrest being executed at the time, and we published it on the front page of the Cape Times. And that person was subsequently released for lack of evidence. And that person then proceeded to sue the Cape Times. And we took that to court and said that clearly in that particular case, the Planet Hollywood bombing was one of the single biggest acts of terrorism that had hit the city of Cape Town. And the public interest in wanting to reach some sort of sense that the law was taking its course and people were being held accountable justified, to my mind, our putting that publication, the picture of the person being arrested in a public place, on the front page of the paper. And the courts ruled against us. And they said, well, actually, in that particular case, what you should have done is at very least blacked out the face of the person so that you were not defaming him. And look, it was a fair point, because the law right now, which again gets flouted by most publications on a regular basis, says that the only time that you're able to name someone who's the accused in a criminal trial is you have to tick three boxes. Firstly, they have to be charged. Secondly, they have to appear in court. And the third thing that needs to happen is that they have to plead guilty or not guilty. And unless they have done all three of those, you're not allowed to name the person who's been arrested. Now, I think all of us know that publications these days flout those rules with regularity. But frankly, the accused in those particular cases, by and large, should be taking those publications to court. So, I guess what I'm trying to say here is that public interest is something that it's a moving target. It's based on circumstances, but there's established case law that actually deals with it. I'm sure Danielle, if he's still listening, will be able to quote rhyme and verse around this. I just quoted based on being on the receiving end as someone who's actually been hauled to court to basically defend the publications that I've been in charge of at the time, even though I was not the person who actually committed the actual act of defamation. But there are some cases where we got away with it. For example, when Earl Spencer, as in Princess Diana's brother, was going through a very public divorce case in Cape Town, and we argued that based on the fact that the overseas publications were carrying rhyme and verse of what was going on in that court, because they were not held accountable by the fact that it was in a South African court, we should be allowed to do the same thing. And obviously Earl Spencer challenged us, but in that particular case, we won it. And not that we carried details of it, but what we wanted to do was to establish a precedent in that case, because, it goes back to rule number one, don't be a dick.
Yeah. Now, okay, so, yeah, public interest, as far as I understood, is like, is it in the public interest? Like, would the public care to know about this? And if they don't, then it's irrelevant. Like, that's, I think, the simplest form of it.
No, it's not public interest in terms of whether the public is interested. The fact that the public is interested is very different from public interest, because
well, that's just
public
confusing.
interest means that there's a material outcome on the public. I would say, based uh, on the information that you are spreading. So, uh, is there public interest in, again, going back to it, the sex lives of celebrity? Absolutely. But but the fact that the public are interested in it doesn't mean that it's in the public interest for that to be divulged,
Oh, okay, I see what you mean.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, oddly it does. All right, well, going back to Dodgy, right, about the cancel culture question now. All right, so you know where I stand on cancel culture. So for me, this is, yeah. So clarify for
Yeah.
us.
So again, like Kanthan said, it's case by case basis. So for example, if my actions have material consequences in the broader public, and Dumo went into the public and broadcasted it, I think he would be well within his rights to do so. I would not have any, let's call it, legal footing to stand on. And also, I think the public would react accordingly. But if that interest does not have a public impact or material impact in the public, as Kanthan stated, then it's a case by defamation, because it did not impact the public in any material way of either knowing or not knowing these sort of things. Is what Kanthan, if I'm understanding this correctly, is what Kanthan alluded to more or less. So that's my position. So, for example, with regards to your case specifically, I don't think that was in the public interest. I don't think your political views, or the lack of political views, etc., has any material impact on what I do, or in the broader public sense. So they were definitely in the wrong there. But if, for example, you were fraudulent in some way, that, I don't know, took money from a charity, then that would be in a different case. So again, case by case basis. So cancel culture does has its use, but again, what is the foundation that underlies that whole process? I would ask. So that's what I've got on that.
Yeah, you did well. Fair. No,
But
I'm just getting clarification.
But Dodgy has actually nailed,
Yeah.
the essence of it. And the essence of it, I can just summarize in this: that cancel culture is reprehensible, but it's not illegal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really the issue that we have. Because, look, every single one of us has the right to choose to not support a particular brand, or to not go to a particular theater, or all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, when you have a scenario where pressure is brought to bear on a venue to prevent a person from performing there, that's a case where you can actually show material loss, based on the fact that there were actions that were triggered by specific individuals, and there you actually have recourse, and I believe you can take them to court, and at the very least end up suing them for damages. But what do you do in a scenario where a brand, for example, withdraws its sponsorship on the basis that they're not prepared to stay the distance in terms of actually sticking up for the reason why they hired the person in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And again, I don't have a correct answer to that. I do think, for example, that it was quite cowardly on the part of Nando's to have pulled sponsorship for Gareth Cliff's Burning Platform. But, is it their right to do so? Absolutely, it's their right to do so, because it is their money.
Yeah.
And, you can go back, close on 30 years, where Madonna did her music video for Like a Prayer. And at that time, she was a brand ambassador for Pepsi, and it was worth a lot of money. But Pepsi ended up taking lots of flack from um, people who felt very strongly that the imagery that she invoked in that particular music video was in some way blasphemous. And Pepsi just said, "Oh, look, we don't want to handle this thing," and so they canceled their sponsorship. Again, it's I think it was wrong for them to do that, but it was perfectly within their rights to end up doing it.
But this
So
is
yeah,
sorry.
and I think the way we counteract cancel culture, from my side, is for those of us who feel strongly about that, to then go out of our way to very publicly support those brands in that particular case.
Yeah.
And you see that works quite effectively in terms of the US.
Yeah.
And by the way, a very specific example for me is uh, people keep trying to cancel the brand Chick-fil-A, which
Really?
yeah, it's a fast food chain in the US, and
Okay.
they're an unashamedly Christian brand. Their stores don't open on Sunday, as an example. Um, they have very traditional Christian views. Well, I should say Judeo-Christian views, which are shared by Judaism and Christianity and Islam around what constitutes a family unit. So, for example, they oppose the concept of gay marriage. But in spite of the fact that they have those views, the brand actually continues to thrive. Why does the brand thrive? Well, there was a youngster who's the son of a friend of mine who, a couple of years ago, I was in Austin, Texas, and he's really quite woke. And but he was driving me home from South by Southwest, and he pulls in at a Chick-fil-A, and I said, "You do realize that these guys actually have views that are kind of contrary to the views that you have?" And he says, "Yeah, but their milkshakes are so damn good." And
Everybody has a
that makes
price.
me, yeah, exactly. And I think the best defense against cancel culture is to keep doing the stuff that you're doing and to be good at it. And I think people who are really smart will learn how to separate those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think cancel culture was a good topic to bring up here, because it's leading me to the next question, which I have for Dumo, which is, Dumo, you took the position of a philosophical situation here. So I'm going to ask you a very philosophical question. And then, guys, I'll only use you or have you on for another 15 minutes. I know we've gone a bit over time, but just another 15 minutes every time, and we'll close it there. So this will be the final kind of question from me. Do you think it is, how can I put this? Basically, what I'm trying to get at is free speech. Okay, I think there's free speech and then there's free speech. What I mean by that is there's a free speech by the constitutional definition, and then there's actual free speech where people can say whatever they want with almost no consequence. Right? We just have, imagine a utopian world where people would just have to accept what people say, regardless of what happens after the fact. So, from a philosophical point of view, do you think we could ever achieve? Because I see a lot of people in the comments have been saying like, "Oh, hate speech is bull, BS. This is all BS. There's no such thing as this. We shouldn't have limitations on speech." Blah blah blah. I've seen a few comments saying that no, there should be no limitations on speech whatsoever. So, do you think that's a good idea, bad idea? Do you think it's possible for humans to ever reach that goal of ultimate free speech?
Okay, okay, first of all, okay, so I think the distinction that you made is between free speech absolutism and free speech barring speech that causes violence. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So, with regards to free speech absolutism, is it possible to have a society like that? Yeah, it is possible. Definitely possible. Should we have a society like that? I don't know. I don't know if we should have a society like that. So here's the thing, because the reason why I'm saying this, because like, let's say, okay, I'll give you what Kanthan and Dodgy said earlier, that like, let's say, for example, if you have a society where you pay no price for what you say. At least then, if someone tries to say that they're going to kill you, at least you know someone's out there to get you, and you can defend yourself accordingly, right? So that's like the trade-off that you're going to make. So I don't know which. I can't say which one would be better. So I'll tell you which one I would prefer. Now, by me saying this, I'm not saying that the one that I prefer is necessarily better. Obviously, I will make my own trade-offs based on that. But I will just stick to the devil I know now. Because right now, given my circumstances, I don't have a weapon to protect myself. So now that I don't have a weapon, I wouldn't want people to know if they're going to kill me or not. But if I did have one, then maybe my views would change on that. So I would say, given my current circumstances, this is what I would prefer. But again, I will also have to make the concession that, look, I do take into account that, look, there is speech that can cause violence. And I'm willing to say that, look, that is a problem and that needs to be solved. Is limiting speech the way to solve it? Perhaps not. Are there other ways? Maybe there are. But yeah, that's the world I prefer. The one that we have right now. The current affairs on free speech is one that I prefer, but that's not to say that's the best one.
The current one, really? Because like the one that we have right now is random wokies saying that you can't say. Yeah.
You're okay. Okay. So sorry, Joe. You're right. Okay. I didn't distinguish. I didn't clarify what I meant by the current one. As in, if you look at the way the Constitution sets it out,
okay,
on what is not allowed, that is what I would prefer.
Okay.
But again,
cool.
it may be the worst option. Who knows? I don't know.
Yeah. Because you never know, dude. You might meet like a woke liberal who says they're very offended because you didn't pronounce them or address them by their pronouns, which is a unicorn, and then you're in the shit, and then it's like a whole thing, and then you're canceled, and then it's like the ManPatria has to shut down, and it's a whole thing. All right, cool. So I'm gonna ask the same question to Kanthan and Dodgy. So basically, do you think what did you call it? A absolute, what was it?
Oh, free speech. A world that adopts free speech absolutism.
Yes, absolutism. Kanthan, let's start with you. Do you think that's possible?
I don't think it's possible because you'd actually need to end up obliterating, cultures that are literally thousands of years old. And, we have to be very clear that almost every culture puts some sort of limitation in terms of what you can and cannot say. So I start off with the Judeo-Christian framework, which says very clearly that you should not commit blasphemy. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, as a very specific starting point. So in order for us to get to the stage where you want to have unmitigated free speech, you effectively need to drive a truck through all of that, which, fundamentally is our views that are held, whether some of us disagree with them or not. Those are views that are held by the majority of the populace on this planet. And you end up trampling on those at your own peril. I remember a while ago, I wrote a piece where I was talking about, I said, some things are inherently stupid. So it's stupid to burn Bibles in front of most evangelical Christians, as an example, or to pour scorn on the Quran within earshot of most Muslims, or to wear miniskirts in the North Street taxi rank. Now, it does not matter that our Constitution gives us the right to do those things. It's just inherently stupid. And, so if we use that as our framework, and it really goes back to rule number one, which is don't be a dick, that I don't think we're going to get to the point where you can have such a thing as an unmitigated free speech. And frankly, I think that as human beings, we shouldn't be going out of our way to just, deliberately do stuff that we know is going to be, offensive to other people. The question of pronouns, as an example, if someone comes to me and says, they identify as a unicorn. Well, that's okay. I'm fine with that. If someone says that you got my pronouns wrong, well, I'll try my best to not actually go out of my way to use pronouns. And, generally my way around that is that I almost never use pronouns. I tend to refer to people by their names or, what they prefer being called. So, if you happen to have changed your name from Fred to Sally, I'll be very happy to call you Sally. I do have a problem when an institution then insists that I memorize pronouns for every person and then holds me accountable for it. No, actually, you're infringing on my rights out there. But
Absolutely.
that's an entirely different scenario. So
Yeah.
and the problem that we've got right now with most of the wokies is that they don't realize that the problem that most people have is the fact that they are trying to be prescriptive around what other people should be doing, rather than, saying, hey, I'd really prefer it if you refer to me as X, Y, and Z. And, I strongly suspect that in the majority of cases, people will just basically go with the flow, and, uh, they'll just go along with it, because I think, most of us as a species, we don't go out of our way to be deliberately offensive to other people. Apart from Julius Malema, of course. But questions in terms of whether he belongs to our species is another thing. And notice I phrased that very carefully.
Yes. Well, Dodgy, what do you think? I know you. I think you would love. I'm assuming, but I think you would love to live in a world like that. But what do you think? Do you think it's possible?
No, because I think people misunderstand what I'm trying to say. This is like the black market, for example. When I say the black market is not the free market, because free does not necessarily mean without some form of limitation. Some limitations can afford more freedom to the broader public than no limitation can. And I think that's a very important distinction that we have to be able to make. Just because you're permitted to say something, for example, does not mean that you necessarily have to say it, right? You still have the choice of doing it. Coming back to the miniskirt, for example, I think I would be very ugly in a miniskirt because my legs are way too hairy and too long for a miniskirt. So I think I'll avoid dressing in a miniskirt in general. But again, yes. So I normally phrase it as example. The black market is, for me, it's a free-floating market because there's no limitation on what can and cannot be done. So that throws a lot of other freedoms out. So, for example, the freedom of coercion, the freedom of bodily autonomy, etc., etc. It's almost the same with speech, but fairly different as well. Because again, like I said, the freedom of speech, or rather incitement to violence, is not prosecuted on the words, but because of the outcome or the consequences that it has. It's the actual outcome that it does have. So can we be more free with our speech? Yes, if we can get away with all this idiotic ideas of anything offensive should be classified as hate speech, whether or not it's art, whether or not it is symbolic in some form or way, then yes, we can get away with it. But that also then means we need to be very precise on our morals, and we need to, as Kanthan also say, not take that to the extreme and drive a truck through the traditions and through the other limitations that would otherwise afford more freedom to other people as well as ourselves in the process.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that from. Look, I think for the most part we all tend to agree, and I'm glad that we had this conversation, guys, because I feel that this conversation led to clarity, especially for me. I learned a lot. So I just want to say thank you very much for joining me and giving me an hour and a half of your time. It's greatly appreciated. Kanthan, it's always a pleasure chatting to you. I really enjoy our conversations. The same with Dumo and Dodgy. Before we go, very quickly, Dumo, are you on for Tuesday? Do you remember?
Next week, right?
Yeah,
Next
yeah.
week, Tuesday.
You're co-hosting with me, and ManPatria are going to be on the show.
Yes.
All right, cool, awesome. Just sorry to put you on the spot, but I just wanted to, you're here. All right, cool. So, guys, in closing, We have 4 minutes left, so in closing, just tell people where they can reach you. But before you do it, just so everybody knows who's watching, I did link everybody's Twitter handle in the description, so you can go at the bottom there. You can follow Kanthan, you can follow Dodgy, you can follow Dumo, and you can subscribe to ManPatria as well under Dumo's name there. So yeah, otherwise, you can let people know what's an easy way to reach you. Dodgy, you can go first.
No, Twitter is basically the place where I'm to be found mostly. So yeah, Instagram and those places I'm not very active. So just follow me on Twitter and see what dodgy ideals and ideas I spew out there.
Awesome. All right, Dumo, where can people find you?
Find me on Twitter at Dumo Denga, or you can just go to our website, manpatria.com.
Awesome. Kanthan.
Well, I put up my website on the screen.
Oh, I thought that was your name. I thought your last name was Com.
Yeah, my last name is .com. I've from the 1st of January, I've actually been blogging every single day.
Awesome.
And I just set myself that as a target from the beginning of the year. And some fairly interesting stuff has come out of it. A lot of it is contrary to what lots of the current narrative is on a range of topics. So for example, today I blogged about the fact that I believe that there's deep behind the scenes stuff going on between Russia and Israel. And yesterday I spoke about how Israel's relationship with the United States is falling apart. And so again, these are views that are very contrary to kind of mainstream culture. I am on Twitter, and I do end up going there and tweeting, but I'm increasingly wary of being on Twitter simply because of the fact it is such a captured space. I'm also on Getter, I'm also on Parler, I'm also on Gab, and I do end up posting on those platforms as well. And I do encourage people to actually go onto those platforms as well, because Twitter's hegemony right now is, to my mind, one of the biggest threats to free speech, and that really we should be exploring as many alternative platforms as we possibly can. I'm Kanthan Pillay on all of those.
Awesome. I 100% agree with that. I'm also on those platforms as well. I do believe that you guys, Dumo and Dodgy, you guys are also on Getter and all these other platforms as well, correct?
Yes.
Awesome. All right. So people just
Yes.
Google them and you should find them. Gents, you may take your leave. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. This really was an awesome, awesome conversation. I'm truly grateful, and I'll have you all back again soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very
guys.
much. Bye.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was the panel discussion for tonight. It was awesome. It was really, really awesome. I learned a lot. I can understand where they're coming from when they say hate speech doesn't exist. It's not really the same definition as the Constitution, and I will always stand by the definition of the Constitution. That's where I stand. I thought it was the same definition, but I was wrong. So, yeah. We learned things on the show, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this was insightful for you too. I hope you learned something as well. It's going to be interesting with the AfriForum versus EFF situation. It's really tough for me to admit that on the one hand, you have a song that I think really is dangerous. I think it is a very, very dangerous song. But the points that they made about, or Kanthan made about, you have to make that connection is a very valid point as well, because that's what the court is going to look at the end of the day. I think this case is going to be a very interesting one and a monumental one for South African law. So we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on that story. Either way, ladies and gentlemen, EFF Julius is still a very dangerous, dangerous man, and he should be called out for it at every opportunity. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it from me. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thank you so much, Helen, Voot, the Mork Rock. I've seen you guys here. Richard, who else was here? Peter, Paco, The list goes on and on. Tracy, thank you so much. Everybody else who tuned in and watched and hang out with us. Helen, thank you so much. Deborah, you guys are all awesome. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all the new names I've seen. Artful, Dodger, Cyberpunk. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And there's many, many more. I can't go through all of them right now. If you're watching on Facebook, thank you so much. Follow, subscribe to YouTube, Twitter, same thing. No matter where you're watching, come to YouTube, subscribe. I've got more content on YouTube, but I also post a lot of different other content on all my social media. So like, follow, do your thing, do the thing. You know what to do. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be back Thursday evening from 7 p.m. You'll be hanging out with me for an hour, and then it's going to be Say What? Comedians Roast the Headlines, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be a fun evening. Join us for a laugh. You guys are awesome. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and until next time, stay safe, be kind to one another, and I'll see you at the next one. Cheers.